Thank you for joining us. The following presentation is from a webinar titled Cloud Accounting, originally produced on July 14th, 2015. The presenters are Greg Lowe of McKonly Asbury and Mike Yeager of Cargas Systems. Enjoy the presentation and visit us online at www.macpas.com for more information about our future events and upcoming webinars.
Thank you, Tyler. It's my pleasure to welcome Mike to our offices here today. I've known Cargas for many years and first met them in the software integration business for a project I contracted to them, and that was the start of a long relationship where I've gotten to see their company grow through the years. So here at McKonly Asbury, we have a lot of respect for not only what Cargas does for its clients as a company, but how they run their own company. And Mike, it's our pleasure to have you here in the office with us today.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here.
Just real quickly, I'll just cover the agenda of what we're trying to get through today during our hour together. We're going to have Mike give you a little bit of a Cargas Systems overview, just a few brief minutes about their company, how they're related to the cloud and cloud computing specifically. And then I've asked Mike to prepare some information today for us to not only define what cloud computing is, but also give us a little deeper dive into maybe some ways accounting packages can be run as cloud applications, some of the pros and cons of that. I'm sure some of you during the presentation will maybe have some questions. You can submit those throughout, and then we'll try to leave some time at the end to get to whatever those questions would be. So we'll kind of finish with a little note from Tyler at the end, and then we'll come back and answer as many of those questions as we can with the time permitted. And also any that we don't get to, of course, you can email us. We'll have some contact information at the end, and we'll get back to you at another time if it can't be today during the webinar. So let me ask you, Mike. Tell me a little bit about, and our listeners a little bit about Cargas.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Greg. It's great to be here. And Cargas Systems was founded in 1988. We look at ourselves as a business software and consulting firm. We have two business units at Cargas. An energy business unit, which is software that we develop. So we're a software developer. And we sell to companies who do home heating oil delivery, propane delivery. And we also have a reselling and consulting division at Cargas where we sell accounting applications, CRM, do systems integration. And today I'm here to talk about our cloud initiative with Intact Financial Accounting Software, which is a cloud accounting application.
Okay.
So just a little bit about our background with Intact, and Intact as the product today we're going to highlight. Intact is considered a best-in-class accounting financial application. And Cargas we took on Intact about 4 years ago. We have a long heritage with Microsoft, reselling the Dynamics product, and we realized that the cloud was really taking over the accounting needs, or the application market related to companies that want to implement who are small and medium-sized businesses. So we looked for an application, and we landed on Intact. And one of the things we like is the deep and rich accounting functionality in Intact. And since we started this journey, we've been recognized as the Intact Premier Partner. So one of the 12 premier partners in the country who have the capabilities of both implementing and modifying and customizing Intact. And we've won numerous awards from Intact. We won the President's Club Award for 2015, just named that, and we were Intact Partner of the Month 3 times. So this is really a big part of our business right now, and something we're very excited to be part of. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about this change. So we've been hearing a lot about the cloud now in the media, in marketing, and some of you are probably saying, okay, all I hear is the cloud, but it hasn't really hit my business yet. And I love this quote from Bill Gates. He says, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and then underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. And if you think about this, when Windows 95 came out, a lot of people were saying at that point in time, wow, this is going to revolutionize things as it relates to the PC desktop market and client-server applications. 2 years later, there still was plenty of mainframe systems being used, DOS applications, more character-based applications. If you go 5 years after that, in the 2000s, everything had changed. Nobody was implementing DOS financial applications. So even though the cloud has been around now for 3 or 4 years as a topic that many people are talking about, we're really starting to see the change take place and the transition going from more client-server applications to the cloud, true cloud applications.
Mike, while we're at that point, I hear a lot of people using the word cloud computing or the phrase cloud computing. And why don't you start us with just kind of defining what do you mean, or what's the commonly accepted definition for cloud computing, just to kind of give us a baseline here to work from.
Yeah, and so if you go to this next slide, this is just a quote that I really liked, is that there's so much marketing buzz about the cloud, is essentially marketing people can call anything the cloud and get attention. People are like, oh, this is the cloud. And since the definition of the cloud is very fuzzy for a lot of people, most consumers think that anything that's the internet is the cloud. And we view it really differently than that. And so I have a couple other slides here that I created. And so definition of the cloud and how we look at it. And here is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And yes, Greg, it might be hard to believe, but there is actually an institution of standards and technology. Our government is one of those things that they've decided that they must come up with their own definitions and we must live by them. Well, I don't know if that's true for cloud accounting, but here's what they say. It's a model for enabling convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources that are rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. Now, that's a mouthful, right? So we're going to take some time here today to try and get a little bit more of, let's say, a human being definition than the Institute of Standards and Technology. So this is something I liked from Dave Nielsen, who's a founder of an organization called CloudCamp. This is his 4 things he says that define cloud computing. It has to be on demand. So it's like the application, the infrastructure is already set up, and all you need is a web browser, and you can access it. Very, very easy. It's self-service. The customer chooses what they want when they want it, meaning you only pay for what you use. You don't have to buy a big, complete application. You can just pay as you go, so to speak. It's scalable. You can start small and ramp up, and it's also measurable, is that you can see what you're getting for what you pay for. And I think that's really a great way to look at the cloud.
Now, are you telling me that this is computing coming full circle? Because you and I remember a day when all the terminals were green.
Yes.
And somewhere behind the scenes was this large box called a mainframe that we accessed. I had no resources at my desktop. I didn't need them because they resided on the mainframe, and I just kind of remotely connected to it. Is cloud computing kind of hearkening back to that day in a way?
Yes, I like the fact you let everybody know how old we are.
We do remember that. Our fathers.
So nobody in the audience right now can tell we both have gray hair. But anyhow,
they do have our pictures there, so that's hard.
Oh, that is true. We do have our picture. I think I'm younger in that picture. Actually, there are similarities, meaning that you don't have to have a hard drive or a large infrastructure in your device that you're accessing the information. The big difference is around multi-tenancy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on, is that there's only one application that numerous companies are using, and that's a big difference that we see in cloud accounting.
Well, tell me a little bit about what makes the cloud different then. Let's hit this next one.
Yeah, so this is really the way at Cargas that we look at the cloud. We think it's a different way to develop software, a different way to deliver the software, and also a different way to price software from what we've done traditionally. So if we go to the next slide, cloud product development. All customers reside in a single database. I don't think that an application is a true cloud application if there are multiple instances of software for each company. So if each company has their own instance, us, that's not a cloud application. So it needs to be multi-tenant, and I'll talk a little bit more about multi-tenant in the next slide. But all customers are on the same version, meaning the software is continuously updated. So typically, if you look at the old days of software development, you would install your software and you wouldn't get a new update or release for another year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And many times it was difficult to deploy and a large implementation. Now with the cloud, you're getting updates quarterly, maybe even more often, 4 to 8 times a year. And what's great about the cloud too is that software developers, they can see how the users are using the software and make changes very rapidly in the next release. So they can say, oh, when users get to this screen, they seem to not know what to do. Everybody's accessing help. We need to make that easier to use. You can actually see that on the cloud applications. So we think that's a really important, is this the way this product development and the rapid release cycle.
Yeah, let's take a little deeper dive into multi-tenancy, if you would.
Sure. Multi-tenancy, in this definition, it's an architecture in which a single instance of the software application serves multiple customers. So with Intact, as the example we're going to show later on, Intact has one instance and one database. And each customer is a tenant of that database, but it's only one instance of the software, and it's only one database. So in essence, a tenant, the idea is that each of those customers and users are renting a piece of that huge application that all of these organizations are using.
So if I had 10 pieces of software all running, 10 separate instances, and I was allowing people to remotely connect to those over the internet, you wouldn't call me a cloud provider, because that's 10 separate instances. Right. And when I make a version change or some kind of change in the software, I got to do it 10 times for 10 different clients. Unlike one version, multi-tenant, I'm making the change one place and it rolls out to every tenant.
Absolutely.
If you would. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about how these apps are delivered, about the software delivery side of cloud.
Yeah, so software delivery, the great thing about this is that you can access your application anytime, anywhere with any device. There's no software installation. You just launch a web browser. You can pay as you go. You can become a user of that software and subscribe to it. No hardware costs. There's no extra costs for upgrades or maintenance. And really, you need limited IT experience to use and maintain the application.
Now, I know you're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different models or the ways in which people buy cloud applications. So talk about the types of models that are available in the marketplace, and then we'll get back to some specifics later about Intact and accounting packages.
Yeah.
But what are the models available?
So this first one, SaaS. I mean, I think a lot of people have heard the term SaaS, and what it stands for is software as a service, or SaaS. And what SaaS applications is that they're usually developed for a specific need. One of the things we see with the cloud is more of a best of breed approach. Instead of having one application that does everything for you, you have certain applications that were developed to meet specific needs. So at Cargas, we provide support for our customers, and we chose a cloud application for providing that support. Therefore, our consultants can roll out of bed if they get interrupted at 1 a.m. with a support call, a customer emergency. They can log on to the support system from their phone, and they can deal with that support instance. The software as a service tends to be this best of breed approach. There's also no client installation. So I think that's really key too, in that it's only a web browser. You're only accessing with a web browser. And the other thing that we think makes something a true cloud app and software as a service, this is really a different way to deliver and price software. So it's subscription pricing, meaning that you pay a monthly fee for a certain number of users, or you pay an annual fee. Many of these applications are licensed on an annual basis. And we also believe that SaaS solutions are multi-tenant, meaning that there's usually one instance and it's upgraded all at one time. And examples of applications such as these are Intact, which we're going to get a peek at today, and a product that we're very familiar with, but other products that many of the people on the webinar today are probably using, like NetSuite, Salesforce, Zendesk is that support application that I was talking about, Office 365, so email tends to be the type of application people are using, or Google, a lot of the Google apps. I don't know if people here are using Google Spreadsheets or that type of thing, or even the Gmail.
Before you go on to the next model, just one question that's come in so far. Let's poke it in here. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you take this one.
Okay.
So just like Office 365, where my email resides on a server at Microsoft someplace, where does the data reside? If you're using Salesforce.com or if you're using Intact, where does the actual records, the actual data exist?
It actually exists where the application is also housed. So the hosting partner, or in this case, the cloud provider, not the hosting partner, the cloud provider, the data would actually be stored there. And this is where, Greg, probably the reason for the question is people do get concerned about security, is they see things like my customer database or my financial information is going to be out there. The uptime that you get from a cloud application such as Intact, Intact was down for a total of 14 minutes last year, so the whole year. Housing servers in-house, very few people could say that. The other thing is that security, internet security, is very, very strong, and there are ways to make sure you have secure applications. There is definitely sensationalism when something happens, like what happened with Target, but all of us, not all of us, I will say, but a lot of us are using online banking. So we feel secure doing our banking and having our cash information out there. That tells you how secure these applications are, because really online banking is really one big cloud application.
Is it a fair example to say, like you use the example of Office 365, which probably some percentage of the people on the phone today, on the webinar today, their IT people are probably using. So my email, my actual the physical data is now stored on a Microsoft server someplace.
That is correct.
My choice is to host Microsoft Exchange myself in my own building and my own IT infrastructure. Both servers in both locations have the opportunity to be hacked from the outside or somebody trying to come after that data. And my question is, do I want that in Microsoft's data center or do I want that in my data center? Yeah. And there's some pros and cons, obviously, of each.
Yes.
Because I can't walk down the hall and put my hands on the Microsoft server, but I could on my own.
Right.
And that's kind of the little bit of the give and take with cloud apps, that it's a little bit of a paradigm shift because I don't have the box in my closet.
That is correct.
In your opinion, tends to be, in the long run, a better thing if you're choosing a secure partner with which to do cloud business with.
If you think about it, all of the money, the millions or billions of dollars even that Microsoft has put in investing in their cloud infrastructure versus what most small to medium-sized businesses can invest in their own infrastructure, I personally would feel more secure with a cloud app from Microsoft. We at Cargas, we recently went from Exchange on-premise at Cargas to Exchange Office 365 online. I would never consider going back. Having made that switch, we had more interruptions. It always seemed to happen on holiday weekends, and I would get a call from a customer about support or something, and, we can't get into your systems. We don't get those calls anymore. And with the email being down, customers submitting support incidents via email. So the other thing is you're only as secure as your internal IT people as well. So, if you have internal IT people, they also have access to that information and probably are not vetted as much as the people who are running the data centers at some of these cloud providers.
All right, well, thanks for that question. It took us on that little bit of a tangent, but I just thought it was an appropriate time to sort of sneak it in.
Great question.
And also, you've taken us through SaaS. Take us through platform as a service then next.
Yeah, one of the big things we're seeing that's happening with the cloud is this idea of that providers such as Microsoft and Salesforce is they're providing platforms for developers where they can develop their own applications. So an example of Microsoft Azure, there's a SQL Server actually with Visual Basic.net and the ability to do custom applications on a Microsoft server, and you have the ability to create this platform for development for your own custom solutions. Salesforce is doing the same thing. Everybody is familiar with Salesforce as the leading CRM application, but Salesforce is developed on a platform called Force.com. And there's other applications. There's a manufacturing application that's just been developed on that platform called Rootstock that I've just started to take an interest in. And so this idea that you can develop your own applications on this platform as a service, very unique.
How about infrastructure as a service in our next model?
So, and it's easy. We can talk about SaaS. We can talk about PaaS. It's hard to say what we would call this, but IaaS, maybe not. But anyhow, this infrastructure as a service, this is what a lot of people have been calling the cloud, where by my definition and the way I would look at it would say it's not true cloud. It's more of a service that you're providing. So this is hosted applications. So you would say, hey, I'm going to buy this application and I don't want to house it on my own servers for some of the reasons we've discussed. But I'm going to buy the actual application. I'm going to put it on somebody else's servers and I'm going to access it through the internet. And many times that might not be through a browser. It may be something like through Citrix or Terminal Server that you would access that. So that to us is much more of we're hosting, we're buying an application. So you still have the things where your upgrades are only coming once every year or two. To apply those upgrades is typically a project of some sort that's going to take a little bit of time. And, it's not a multi-tenant type of environment.
I've basically rented a server room.
Exactly.
Right? Instead of having it in my building, I'm renting somebody else's rack and their gear and maybe putting my own specific software on it.
Absolutely.
You buy that? Okay.
Yeah, and a couple of Amazon is one of the top providers of infrastructure as a service. They're hosting applications for all different companies. A lot of the larger companies are actually developing their applications and using Amazon as that infrastructure as a service model. Rackspace is another example. Microsoft's doing this with Azure as well as the development platform. HP has something. So there's a lot of different companies who are getting into this space. So when you hear certain companies talk about the cloud that they're developing, like HP, it really is not, they haven't changed the way they're developing software or have a unique way of developing software. They really just have a unique way of, not really even unique, they're just providing that software through their servers that they have housed in their server farms. And they're providing the backups and the maintenance and those types of things for those.
Okay.
So,
well, we've talked about some of the pros and cons of of cloud versus on-premise, et cetera. Why don't you take us through a quick review in your mind of what the pros and cons are, or why somebody would want to be considering a cloud application of any kind, really?
Yeah. So if you think about cloud versus on-premise, so what the differences are, and if we have this slide, okay, we do have the slide up. So the cloud, we look at it, you have limited IT resources are required. With a lot of on-premise apps, you need on-site IT resources, including backups. One of the interesting things is we even talk about backups. A lot of companies are not even backing up their data, their internal data, on those old tape drives. Once again, we're old enough to actually, probably a lot of people here remember those because people were still doing this only 4 or 5 years ago. But people are actually backing up their entire data in their servers on the cloud. The cloud apps are accessed via the internet or mobile devices. On-premise apps tend to be accessed via a client server model or local users using Citrix or terminal server for remote connectivity. The cloud software is not owned, and some people can look at this as both a positive or a negative as far as whether you own the software. And this is something as an objection that we run into. People compare it to buying or leasing a car in some instances, and it's amazing. You'll talk to people who have different preferences, but with the cloud, you don't own the software. You're paying through a subscription model. On traditional on-premise, you own it, and you're paying an annual maintenance fee. So on top of that, even though you bought the software, you tend to be paying 15 to 30% annually of that license every year. Where with the cloud, you're paying an ongoing subscription. And one of the huge benefits that I see to the cloud is this idea that your updates occur 4 to 8 times a year versus your updates on an on-premise solution being every 12 to 24 months. And as we get into more of accounting, I think as accountants, we can understand requirements because accounting requirements are changing much more rapidly in today's world. Think about sales tax and how variable that is in the current environment.
Is it fair to say that those updates, because there's many more of them during the year, they tend to be a little more minor as well versus a major whole version change, which maybe I have to take my application if I'm hosting it myself and I'm the only tenant, it's just mine. There'd be sort of a major version upgrade that could take the software out for a day while the upgrade takes place versus smaller incremental changes that are being added through the year.
Yeah. One of the things that is very important with a cloud app is the user adoption and education. So if you're updating your applications as rapidly as an Intact is, and Intact comes out with 4 releases a year, you have to look at those upgrades and prepare your user community for that upgrade. So they talk to users about different changes that are being made to the software applications. So they will say, this is a non-disruptive change, meaning you don't have to change the way you process transactions. So we're not changing anything about any of the business process. It's more cosmetic and those types of changes. They will have what they call more disruptive, which is, it sounds like a real negative term. It's not. Hey, we've improved the business logic, the business process in this process. And therefore, we're going to have these webinars. They're doing webinars very similar to this, where they're educating their user community, a couple of months in advance, a couple of weeks in advance. So up to 4 to 6 weeks in advance, they'll say our spring release of 2015 is coming out. You want to make sure you're on this webinar to learn about these releases. So the changes can still be even more dramatic. Intact just went through a user interface change, a major on on accounts payable, and that was something they needed to make sure they got the education out to the user community. And what they saw was the user community adopted the change very quickly because they made it easier to use. And I think many of these apps tend to be easier to use. Everybody's using web browsers nowadays. And they found that the users really responded to the changes. As part of those webinars, they can get feedback and make any adjustments as necessary. Hey, you took away this feature. This was really important to us for this reason. And they've actually gone back and adjusted, and they can do that on the fly and make sure that they're getting that kind of feedback from their customers, which I think is a great thing.
So we've got a couple of slides sort of summarizing what you believe are the advantages of cloud computing. We're about halfway through our time right now, so let's hit those real quickly since we have them here. Just advantages of cloud computing, begin with affordability.
Yeah. So the cloud, I think this is great. We see a lot of companies that are in startup mode that have high growth expectations. So we find that companies who are like, okay, we're small today, we've got funding, we have high expectations for our growth, they can start small. So you can start with a very small subscription license, and then you can sort of try out the applications before you deploy them. It's more of a try before you buy type of scenario. And then you pay as you grow. So a company with one accounting user, they're not paying as much as a company with 10 users on their subscription. And if you need more functionality, you can try out some things and then add that functionality. The other thing, and we've talked a lot about this, is the continuous innovation. Cloud applications are more innovative than on-premise applications. We've lived as a reseller of on-premise applications for 20 plus years, and there's some really, really good changes that have occurred over those 20 years. But we have seen in our short time working with Intact much more innovation as it relates to user interface, and those updates being continuous. Also, if there's any laws, changes to accounting laws or FASBs, very easy to adopt those quickly with the next release. So Intact, they'll have a release that comes out in spring, then they have a summer, fall, etc. The infrastructure, I think one of the big advantages is most small business owners, if you think about this, they're experts in their field. Either they're experts at selling their solutions or delivering their solutions, whether that's products or services. They're not IT people. You take all of that need to understand IT infrastructure away from your company, and you can have the experts who've developed the cloud solutions do that for you. So you have security. Your security is way above in most of these cloud apps what you have in an on-premise app. Also, disaster recovery is something that you hear people talk a lot about. This disaster recovery, you don't have to worry about, what are we going to do with our data if we have a flood here? Where are the tape backups? Well, you don't have to worry about those types of things and applying those. Things go down in your local office, you could go to Starbucks, access your accounting application, and you're still business as usual from Starbucks. It's really that easy, and not having the infrastructure. Collaboration is really a big part of the cloud as well. If we go to the next slide, it's much easier to get users on the same screen looking at the data. So you could have conference calls, everybody's in the same dashboard, clicking on it, drilling down, and they're getting their own user experience. Whereas a lot of applications, you can't have that kind of collaboration because, hey, that screen's now locked because there's people in it and you can't access it. The other thing we found with applications such as Google, if anybody has used the Google apps, the Google presentations, PowerPoints, you can have people making changes to those apps in the same document and real time viewing those types of things. Collaboration is much easier in a cloud app. It positions you for growth. We see most of the companies who are adopting cloud accounting applications tend to be those who are going for IPOs, have a strong backing from investment firms, and they're looking to grow rapidly. Those are the ones that we see adopting cloud technology most rapidly. Intact, their biggest user base are people who are adopting Intact, are those who are going from QuickBooks, they're outgrowing QuickBooks, and those who are planning an IPO in the next 2 to 3 years are the types of companies who are adopting Intact. And companies who really want to grow. They're like, hey, we're not going to be satisfied with the status quo. We have growth initiatives, and that's where we want to spend our money. The other thing I talked before about is this best-of-breed approach to systems. To me, that is really critical. Too many systems try to be all things to all people, and I think that this allows you to say, hey, Intact is, at a Cargas, we can say Intact is best for our accounting, but Zendesk, which is another cloud app, is the best for our support help desk. And we can create integrations. There's open APIs in most of these applications. And that's where I get into this integration as well, is that cloud applications tend to have open APIs where it's easy to develop integrations to those applications.
Let's move more into the accounting side of things now. I appreciate the summary on just the pros and cons of really those last few slides could have been cloud computing discussion on any type of application, but we have a lot of folks that are on this webinar that are accountants or controllers or CFOs, et cetera, company owners of small businesses. So talk a little bit about accounting, the function specifically as it relates to the cloud, and obviously it's going to tie a little bit into Intact, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So I actually wrote a blog about this. I don't do too much blogging. Brian, who is in charge of our marketing at Cargas, would like me to blog more. But anyhow, I did one about the accountant as a superhero. And this isn't even on the slide, but it just made me think about this just now. That an application such as Intact, where you can slice and dice the data and look at it in different dimensions, allows you to do analysis much more easily in traditional on-premise apps. So I picture the CFO in a board meeting, with Intact, a cloud application such as Intact, being able to sit there and, say, well, how much is what's our revenue on this product? And how is that by location? And which customers are most profitable? And instantly being able to call that information up in a browser and show it, and then have the drill down capabilities. Access to information in this type of system is much easier. It also is easier. I remember when I was an accountant back in the day, Greg, the worst thing we ever thought is when the president of the company has decided he wants to get in and start playing around with the systems, right? Because we're like, oh no, we weren't worried about what he might see. We're worried about what he might do, right? But with these cloud apps, everybody uses web browsers. I mean, I can't imagine there's anybody on this today who's not familiar with using a browser, drilling down into information, and the cloud apps allow you to have that information for executives to make decisions and not have to get into any of the transactional information. And to me, that's a huge plus. Not that we tried to hide things from the presidents of the companies I work for, but we were afraid of what they might do.
Let's do this. Again, we're about 40 minutes in here, so I want to make sure we get time to do this. Let's try this. It's one of our firsts in our studio here. We're going to ask Mike to get up, move to the other side of the studio, and fire up a browser session and take a peek at one such cloud application being Intact. This is what Mike mentioned earlier, and I just thought it might be helpful for him to give us his own little guided tour of an Intact, and I'm sure this is a sample database, but it may prompt some other questions from some of our viewers if they get to see it.
Thanks, Greg. Well, over here, it's nice to hear this might be the first time, so I'll try not to screw it up so you guys will feel comfortable doing this in the future. But this is Intact, and this is for a company called Qubit. It's a make-believe company. But one of the things with being multi-tenant that Intact, the architecture of Intact allows, is this idea of being multi-multi. Companies that we see adopting Intact are companies who have multiple entities. They tend to be multi-location. They might have multiple currency needs. So Intact is a multi application, and the way their database has been structured allows that. So I'm in Qubit. As you can see, there's a Qubit USA, and there's also a Qubit Canada. We're going to stay in USA. So let's say I'm a user, and let's say I'm a controller, and I'm just going to launch a dashboard. I'm not going to sit here and create accounting transactions. I think if I would say I'm going to enter an accounts payable transaction, we would have a lot of people leave right now. But anyhow, if we look at this as a controller, this is the first time I've been in this screen since Intact had a release. So new in the spring release. So this is just saying, so it comes up and it says, we now have something called performance cards. and real-time dynamic comparisons across time. These performance cards I'm going to show in another dashboard. So I can close this as my accounting user, and immediately in my dashboard, what comes up is the things you would think an accountant would be interested in. We have our balance sheet, we have our cash balance, so we have our financials related to our cash flow statements, and we have our P&L. And you can just quickly, if I wanted to change these things, I could change where these are displayed, and now I have my P&L at the top of this view. Also, I don't have in this sample database any of the workflow that's actually turned on. But if I had other users creating journal entries and myself as the controller, my responsibility is to approve those journal entries. They would all show up here. They also would show up in your email if you wanted to, and I would have the ability then to drill down and either approve or make changes or say, hey, I want to change in this journal entry. Also, purchases. You can set up workflow in an application such as Intact where the controller must approve any purchase over, let's say, $10,000. And then from there, anything over $25,000 is the CFO, anything over $50,000 is the president. Each one of them would see a transaction that comes into their purchases bucket based on their criteria. And then you also have the ability to drill down into these applications, or these, not applications, I'm sorry, into these financial statements. And then as you notice, anytime you get to this view, you can either email it. So you can say, so think about this as a controller. All day as a controller, you print your financial statements. Your department managers say, I can't possibly be over budget, right? What's in that account? You hear that all the time. Well, they could have access to Intact themselves, but if they don't, you could actually drill down and then email them all of the transactions that create this. So if we keep drilling back, we go to this next. This was actually, I clicked on the account number. I wanted the amount. This shows me all of the transactions that now make up that amount. So you can see all of the transactions, and I could expand this, and you can see a much larger view, and you could export or email that. And the export's exporting it to Excel. So those are some of the things that you can do with Intact. And if I go to this other dashboard, this might be the dashboard that is not the controller, but that an executive is looking at. And this is a great use of these performance cards, is this ability. So this executive might say, the 4 things I am most concerned about in my professional services company is net income, our utilization rate, our day sales outstanding on receivables, our accounts receivable balance, and what's our revenue versus plan. So as you can see, you have these performance cards and the ability to actually drill down and get into the information in a little bit more detail to see what makes up those performance cards. These are things we talk about, visibility into the data. These are the types of things that having a true cloud browser application allows you to do.
A fast question for you, Mike, because I've heard people say that a lot of these cloud applications are sort of like accounting applications light. You know what I mean? It's great that they're on the cloud, but they don't compare to more robust premise-based accounting solutions, et cetera. But I've heard you say that that's not your opinion of Intact. That you believe its functionality compares with sort of the prime-time accounting apps of the same kind of class.
Yes. We're a long-time reseller of Microsoft Dynamics, and I always felt that Dynamics GP is one of the best just accounting applications I've ever worked with. And I've used many apps in my prior life as well, and I've seen many apps, and we've supported a few other apps. Intact actually is the most robust just accounting functionality. It's this idea of best of breed. It's a best-in-class financial application. So if you're a distribution company and you would want this kind of visibility just into your accounting information, Intact, in my opinion, provides that better than just about any product that I'm familiar with at a price point that makes sense for a mid-sized business than any other application just related to accounting.
I'm gonna. A couple of questions have come in while you've had the software up, and one of them maybe you want to answer while you have the software up. It says, hey, can you make any modifications to the standard software? And I don't know if the user or the questioner here is asking about the kernel, if you will, the core behind the scenes app. I guess that would be a no. Or the way things appear or are configured, or your reports, your chart of accounts, et cetera. All those things are going to be different for every company.
Yep. So that's a great question. There's a lot of configuration and setup to getting Intacct set up to meet your needs. You cannot modify the source code of Intacct, but there is something called platform services, which is the Intacct platform, and a company such as Cargas, so we're actually certified on the platform services. We can make modifications in the Intacct platform using the Intacct objects built into the software where you would not know it's a customization. It's built in there seamlessly. The other thing we have done is we've also developed applications outside in a browser and then integrated them into Intacct. So there's a lot of options here. A lot of what you view, so the fields, labeling of fields, the setup, what allows Intacct to create these kinds of views into your financial data is something called the dimensions. And dimensions are the different segments that you can measure your organization on. So things like customers or locations or classes or items are all dimensions. And Intacct allows you to customize as many dimensions as you want. You can also license custom dimensions from Intacct. So there's a lot of configurability and setup there without changing the application itself.
We got a couple of questions that are stacked up that we'll try to get to here. But Mike, while you have this screen up, anything else you want to show us in that little Intacct?
Just real quickly, the other thing I like about this is many times you'll be looking at a graph, and some people really prefer the graphical information, is you also have the ability to just go and say, hey, I just want to look at the raw data. As somebody who's not real visual myself, more of a numbers guy, I probably would go to this all the time. I'd say, oh, that's a neat graph. You know, I can see that we had a really good January, but we're doing better in June. What's the data tell me? So I can say, oh, well, our revenue's grown from 6.3 million to 7.2 million over that time period. And I think it allows people who are more graphical to get their information that way. And those of us that like to see things in much more of the actual numbers and data, it's better for that as well.
Okay. Well, let's bounce back over to the slides a second, and then I'm going to hit a couple of questions that have come in. Again, keep sending them in. We'll get to them as many as we can. We've got about 6 of them queued up, and we've got about maybe 10 minutes left in our time. So, this question's come in with SSAE 16 and recent concerns about data security. You know, what thoughts do you have for the people listening to this webinar, watching this webinar, about due diligence on cloud providers?
Yeah, I think it's really important when you're talking to different cloud companies is I would ask them questions. I quoted Intacct's downtime. So how much downtime did you have last year on your systems? Have you ever had a data breach on your data center? Those types of questions I think are very legitimate questions that you should be asking the companies. Intacct, their CFO of Intacct will get on the phone with client, and we've had, believe me, we have people who've asked those questions when we've sold Intacct. And the Intacct CFO, Mark Linden, he'll get on the phone and he'll talk to them about, you know, all of the how much downtime they've had, and what they do to protect your data. And you'll be really, really impressed. I mean, redundancy, they have a data center in California. It's as redundant in a data center in King of Prussia. There's a redundancy built, so they're covering both coasts. Those types of things. Security is still a thing that gets asked all the time. And I always bring up the online banking, how everybody is doing EFT and banking online. But I think that if I was vetting a cloud app, particularly a financial app, I'd be asking not just the partner such as Cargas, but the vendor. Ask for time with them and say, can I talk to them about these types of things?
Some of these questions are are real specific to certain situations, and I think a couple of them here are actually appropriate for our webinar. Some of them we'll just get back to the questioner maybe directly because it's specific to their environment. But real quickly, just go back one slide if you could about the one more slide prior to that slide there. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that the AICPA has gotten behind Intact. Tell us a little bit about that because we do have a lot of CPAs that are on this call.
Yep. This to me was one of the reasons that at Cargas we chose Intact. So we could have chose. We were being recruited by lots of software vendors to become a partner for their software product. And what we liked most about Intact, I thought, was the best in class. This idea that, hey, this is a great accounting application. But the fact that the AICPA, which is such, an organization, just by saying that, it just carries a lot of clout with accountants, that they have endorsed Intact as what they say is the preferred financial solutions. This isn't just around cloud apps. This is all the applications that are out there. And Intuit, obviously they want to keep you on QuickBooks as long as possible, but Intuit and Intact have a relationship where Intuit is recommending Intact as, hey, we want to graduate from QuickBooks. We've gone as far as we can with it. That relationship with Intuit. And the other thing is Intact has a very strong relationship with Salesforce and one of the best integrations with Salesforce.com.
On this last slide, the next slide here, you kind of have a summary of the Intact features. Anything you want to highlight there for people listening? Because I have a couple other specific questions I'm going to hit you with when you're done this slide. So
just a couple of things that I think Intact does really well. We've highlighted the financials, and to me that's really one of the keys. This idea of employee expense tracking and time management, Intact does an excellent job of that and gives employees access to some of the information, and they allow you to have employee users at a very, very good price point. And I think the business analytics, a lot of traditional accounting apps, the financial reporting is built outside of the application. Having it ingrained and actually developed within the application, huge plus. The thing I would tell you, though, so like if you're looking for MRP, right, for your manufacturing company, Intact is not that solution. I think one of the key things that Intact is doing, not trying to be all things to all people. It's not the best wholesale distribution product. But if you're a wholesale distributor who says, I would love to take my distribution application and tie it to a best-in-class financial application, great solution. And so that's the one thing I think is really important. And it's easy to integrate other applications too.
I'm gonna go with this question, even though it's super specific, because I think it might be helpful for a lot of the people that are listening.
So, Greg, you're thinking I know details.
Well, I'm going to ask you to come up with some. Here you go. Ready? Look, I got $10 million in revenue in my company. I got 3 people in my accounting department. I got a controller. I got AP, AR, GL type of people.
Yep.
So 3 people in the department, $10 million in revenue. I'm running sort of to the end of what QuickBooks Enterprise can do for me. How much is this great software going to cost me? Would you guesstimate?
Yeah. So I would say you're looking at, let's say, $12,000 to $16,000 annual subscription for Intact, and you're probably looking at another $12,000 to $18,000 for implementation. Now that implementation would be a one-time cost, and Cargas would provide that, and the subscription would be your annual subscription. One thing to think about when you're doing this is you would not have to worry about upgrades. They would be applied automatically. You wouldn't have future upgrade projects. Server
upgrades and the infrastructure side of it as well. Okay.
Yep.
Another specific one. This is my question. How many Intact clients have you migrated so far to an Intact accounting instance?
Yeah, we have 33 customers that we have implemented Intact on right now. We're I wouldn't say they're all live. We have 2 right now that are about to go live. So 31 that have gone live on Intact with Cargas helping them. We are seeing the requests for Intact are growing rapidly. When we started on this journey 3 or 4 years ago, people didn't even, I'd talk about Intact. They're like, I've never heard of it. Now we're starting to hear a lot more from people saying, hey, we've heard of Intact. We want a cloud solution. So the other thing is, Greg, we're growing our staff dramatically because we see this opportunity for us here at Cargas.
How many folks do you have certified on the Intact product that you would send out to a client?
Yeah, we have right now we have 12 certified people, which we have 11 certified, one getting certified this week, so that'll be 12. We just hired a consultant, and her first day at Cargas was to go fly to Dallas to get trained on Intact.
Excellent.
That's how we look at it. And believe it or not, the people at Cargas kind of laugh when I say this, but I'm certified on Intact, and that's kind of a scary thought for some people. So
excellent. Let's do this. Let's, for sake of time, we got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to bounce it back over to Tyler. A couple of thoughts for the group here that he will share and some instructions, and then we'll come back with any last questions that you have. Please put them through. We've gotten through most of the ones that have been submitted, but we'll have a closing comment in just a second. I'm going to turn it back to Tyler. Okay, we've actually got a couple of ones that are really specific to individual organizations remaining. We'll follow up with those folks individually. This last slide here just has our contact information. If you have a question for Mike's email address is there. You can call him direct to Cargas Systems. Probably just as easy to email him and let him know you're interested. Obviously, there's a lot more to see and do in and around the Intact application, and we couldn't really do full justice today of a deep dive into the software, but I myself have been through that and found it pretty informative if you're just interested in sort of kicking the tires of what the Intact software might look like from an accounting perspective. So both of our contact information is on there. Again, feel free to email us and take advantage of those ways to get the copies of the presentation, et cetera, that Tyler just went through. I want to thank Mike for being our guest here today, for sharing a little bit about cloud computing and about Intact.
Thank you, Greg.
All right.
It's great to be here.
All right. It is right at our end time. We are straight up 3 o'clock. So thanks again for everybody for attending, and have a great week.
Thanks.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McKonly Asbury. We hope you join us and participate in our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn more about our upcoming events by visiting us at www.macpas.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.